Welcome to NCSS Here for You. For over 50 years, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has been providing access to quality psychosocial services to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community have changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. We take our role in the community seriously, and we strive to provide the highest quality services. According to Eric Erickson, a noted developmental psychologist, every person must pass through a series of 8 interrelated stages over the entire life cycle. NCSS provides a continuum of services to meet the needs of individuals who at any point seek assistance. NCSS's purpose is creating a stronger community, one person at a time. Now, let's get to today's show. I'm Joe Halco, Director of Community Relations for Northwestern Counseling and Support Services, and welcome to another episode of NCSS Here for You. Each month on this program, we discuss a topic of interest to local residents, and to do that, we normally have individuals from one of the 3 direct services divisions that make up NCSS. The 3 direct services divisions are Behavioral Health Services, Children, Youth, and Family Services, and Developmental Services. And on occasion, we have individuals from the administrative department of NCSS, which supports the 3 direct services divisions here on the show with us. In the field of psychology, a tremendous amount of research is available on many areas that make up an individual's personality. However, it's interesting to note, and rather surprising, that not much exists on the subject of attitude. The definition of attitude is the manner, disposition, feeling and position, etc., with regard to a person or thing. A tendency or orientation, especially of the mind. An attitude is a hypothetical construct that represents an individual's degree of like or dislike of an item. Attitudes are generally positive or negative views of a person, a place, a thing, or an event. To discuss the subject of attitude and its effects on behavior in greater detail, I'm extremely pleased to introduce this month's guest, who is Ted Mable, the Executive Director of NCSS, and Ted also has a doctorate in organizational psychology from the University of Boston, or actually Boston University. Ted, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Ted, let's begin with why an interest in people's attitude?
Well, many years ago, I had just realized that observing people in organizations, that people who didn't work out, so to speak, were fired, rarely were fired because they didn't have the knowledge or skills of the job, but it was more the way they behaved on the job. And whenever I would speak to groups and mention my observation and something along that line, I would notice managers would smile and their heads would nod like you hit a chord. And I had realized that back in the 1960s, there was a major study at Harvard that really looked at why people were fired and across the United States. An overwhelming majority of the reason that people were fired wasn't to do whether they didn't have the knowledge or the skill level to do the job. It was really poor attitude, their behavior. And it's interesting, within the last year, a Human Resource Association did a study again in the United States, and they actually found 46% of the people who are dismissed from their work got nothing to do with their ability to do the job. So I became intrigued with this, and when I talk to people in orientation, I talk about what competence really is and what it takes to be successful in an organization. I generally say you have to have the knowledge, you understand generally the theory about what you're doing and why you're doing it. You have to have the skill. You have to be able to go do the task that's required of you. But third, and most importantly, you have to have the proper attitude, because it's critical to the success of the organization. And we can help you. Generally, organizations do a lot, invest a lot in its people around the knowledge and the skill, but they can't give a person an attitude. And in the final analysis, I think an attitude is what makes or breaks a person on the job, and consequently, in many ways, can bring a team, an organization down. The whole one bad apple theory ruins the whole pack. I really truly believe one bad actor, one person in an organization with a bad attitude can bring a company down.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really within that context that I became really intrigued with it. And I remember about a year ago watching Jack Welch on a show, GE, and he talked about how he evaluated his subordinates. And he says he really looked at them one of four ways. He says, first of all, there's the person that produces good outcome, and he says, and has a good attitude, good values. He says that person you want to keep, you reward them, you pay them lots of money, give them big bonuses, and to get out of their way. He says the second person has got a really good attitude, good values, very supportive of the company, but is not producing the outcome. He says they need a lot of help, support. You need to fix whatever's going wrong. Then the third person who's got a bad attitude, poor values, and doesn't produce an outcome, the outcome that's needed. He said, that's easy. You fire that person. But the most difficult person, he said, is the person that's producing a good outcome, but has a bad attitude, poor values. He said, that's a difficult one. And he said, and the announcer says, what do you do with that person? He said, in that person, that difficult decision, you have to fire that person. Because even in the long run, in the short term, they're producing the outcome for the company. Their poor value set, their poor attitudes will have great damage to the company in the long term. So that's really a little bit over 40 years.
Sure.
And when I've looked at trying to find research around, there's a lot of theoretical research around attitude, but very little applied analysis about attitude in the workplace and measures around that. So I think it's an intriguing and virgin area for research, to be honest with you.
And I know, isn't it interesting, because even if you look at an organization like NCSS, is if you had, let's say, 2 or 3 finalists for a position, and all 3 of those individuals seem to have the appropriate backgrounds, great skills, but yet the difference in hiring the individual, even though it might be unseen at that point in time, would be an attitude, I would imagine. That is the make or break, perhaps. And somebody may even have greater skill set, right. But yet if somebody else has a better attitude, that person may be able to go further or to at least work with individuals.
That's right, Joe.
Better.
I think the problem is an interview is a flip of a coin at best. And someone may come across really well interpersonally, because I think you don't, in an interview, it doesn't tell you maybe a lot of generally about a skill level or their knowledge. Mm-hmm. You can probe knowledge a little bit. Skill level, you need to perform them. If you don't know them at all, you're dependent on references, if you can get references in this day and age. And often I find if companies are trying to get rid of somebody or glad to see somebody go, they give them, quite sad to say, they give them positive recommendations to get them out of the company. It's a hard thing to judge. It really isn't until they're actually in the workplace. Yeah. Oftentimes, 1 or 2 days, the first 1 or 2 days, you start to get a good reading on that person's attitude. You kind of know one right away in many cases.
Yeah, and therein, I think, lies, that's another part of the puzzle to why somebody has an initial probationary period, because certainly you need to know if they have the knowledge. That'll come through.
Absolutely.
As well as the skills. But that attitude being that third element that, as you say, within a period of time, you get a pretty good indicator on that.
And while one can change their attitude, I'm sure we'll get into that, at least in my experience, if after a 6-month period, and if you've given a person a feedback, you don't see a change, the chances of that changing after 6 months are very, very slim on that. And I think one of the mistakes that we probably have all made, if we're honest with ourselves, is that you come to that 6 months, and it is that person who's got some good skills, could be of some value to the company, but they still don't have they're not supportive, they're not a team player, that sort of thing. And you make the wrong decision, say, well, you'll give them another chance, and you go beyond that 6-month period, and then you live to regret it on that. I've learned that if they haven't made it by 6 months, pull the trigger.
Mm-hmm. The chances are that
the probability is it isn't going to change in the future.
So then how would you define an attitude?
Well, it's generally a feeling and a thought process that one has about something, which I think embedded behind that, or a foundation of some sort of value set, perception that drives a sort of thoughts and feelings that result in a certain behavior that is either perceived supportive or not supportive in an organization, and it plays out.
Now, when looking at that, then, what shapes a person's attitude? Because certainly there's a variety of factors that come into play there.
That's right. I think a person's attitude is kind of an evolving state. You come into this world, you're born into this world with a certain temperament, a predisposition to a certain temperament, i.e., you tend to be more extroverted or introverted, kind of objective-oriented or sort of human feeling-oriented. And then, so that temperament is there, and that's sort of, it's sort of the block of clay, if you will. And then obviously parents play a major role. So when the family you're brought up in, the value set they have, you often, I often think of we, as you know, at NCSS, we give awards every year. We call them the 1%ers, people who stand out, the top 1%. When I interview them before we give them the award, they often, the common denominator, and moms out there can take great credence on this, is that they often refer to their mother or their father as a role model. And it's their work ethic, their skill, their interest that drove them to what they are today. So parents play an important role. Then as a child starts moving to adolescence, if you've ever brought up children, the peer group starts to become more influential than the parents, which is often can be a difficult time.
Yeah.
Because and that's why the selection or the peer group that one's child falls into, for a period of years, plays a heavy role in the formation of one's attitude. And obviously, in that time of life, that's the rebellion stage starts building, and you want to be different from your parents. So if your parents are conservative, you want to be liberal. So there's that, which is sort of a healthy process, but can be a painful process. Then as you move out of adolescence, and you move into the work environment, then the formation of that, it begins to be tipped off about you have certain needs to be met, interests, and can you find a place? Are you finding a job that you like? Are you recognized? Do you feel you get the rewards? Are you satisfied with your life? That sort of thing, all play a role right up into adulthood. So it caps off by being in a job, and why work is so important for one's quality of life, because if you have work that meets your needs, it's satisfying, you feel you're making a difference, there's a sense of purpose in your life, you generally will have a very positive attitude because there's a match between work and your need. But if there isn't that match, and for many people there isn't that match, they will be perceived as having, it affects their attitude, and i.e. their attitude affects their behavior in the organization.
Now, I know we just touched on this a tad a little while ago, but can a person's attitude be changed?
The answer to that is yes. And there's really two ways. The first way is, first of all, let me say that to change one's attitude is a choice. A person can choose to change it. Whether they have the right, how does one know they have the right attitude or don't have the right attitude? The only way they know, obviously, is if they're getting feedback from the environment they're in. Their supervisor, parents, friends are giving them feedback. So one way is to be open to feedback. Actually pursue it. If you feel that there's something you're not really jiving here, that you ask a close friend, somebody, and try to get feedback, and then develop a little plan about what you can do. Test new behaviors, on something. So if you see somebody that seems to doesn't respond to you in a certain way, you might change the way you deal with that person or talk to that person, and see if it's it's having an impact. I think the second way is just sort of a self-assessment, being aware. Do you have friends? How are you getting along with your peer group? Do you seem to be fitting in, or do you always seem to be disagreeing? Okay, do you seem to be the source of conflict, or seem to be causing conflict in everything you say or do? So that is a really good self-assessment and a desire to change. Now, flipping over And let's look at this from the frame of reference. Let's say talk about the person who has the bad attitude. How do they view the world? They probably do not view themselves as a person with a bad attitude. They would tend to view, you're wrong.
Yeah.
The organization's wrong. The team is wrong. They are right. And what do you expect of me? You know, I need to be an honest person and stand by my values. It's a difficult
balance, so to
that's
speak,
right.
there,
It's a difficult dilemma of sorting that kind of situation out, you know, because they may firmly believe they are in the right. I often say, when somebody says to me, I'm not interested in that, I won't do that because of my values. Well, I'm saying they may be your values, but it isn't the organization values. So we've got a clash here. You've got to resolve this and be happy with it, or you need to move on. You know, because I can respect your values, doesn't mean they are the values. And that's what I think generally plays out there. As I often said, the root of bad attitude is embedded in a value set that for some ways coming into conflict with a value set of the community you're in.
Well, and that gets into areas like what a culture of a given organization has.
Right.
And you can have someone who may be in a different culture, their attitude seems pretty good, but for whatever reason, in the current culture that they're in, for whatever reason, it just isn't a good fit. And because it's not a good fit, all of a sudden perhaps their attitude changes.
Absolutely. You probably have seen this or read about this many times, where you'll have somebody who's very successful. Let's take the highest level, leadership. A very successful leader in running an insurance company, running an automobile company, and then they go and they take a job as a college president, let's say, and they fail. They're fired within 2 or 3 days. Okay. You wonder, how can somebody be so successful in one environment, move over and be fired in be removed in the second environment? And typically that is because of the switch. They weren't able to adapt to the change in culture. Managing, okay, there's an old book now by a man called Harlan Cleveland. He was, I think, in the Kennedy administration, and had been successful in government and in the private sector, and then went on to be president of the University of Hawaii. And he used to say, my Rotarians could never understand that being president of a university, that I don't really run the university. You know, they never could understand that, because you have to be in that culture. You have one culture, if you're running an automobile plant, for decisiveness, speed, efficiency. It's called for and respected and accepted. Another culture, the process, working with people, facilitating a decision where decisions aren't made over a period of time, and everybody plays a role in that, in this community, is what the word they will say. It's a totally different culture. So you take a person who's used to working out one way one day and hop into a whole entirely country, will be literally out of water. They will, and often asked to leave, and they can't understand why. And I think that the reason that is, it isn't easy. You can be successful in one culture because it matches your value set, matches sort of the attitude you had. You can change and move into another culture. And I think this is why you generally say, for the first 6 months, don't try to do anything. Try to get in there, swim with the current, and get a feel for the culture, and slowly move in and adapt to that culture. And some people can do that, others can't.
Others can't. And you know, I know we've talked about this off the air, but therein lies also the difference between an individual who is brought into an organization who is there specifically to turn an organization around.
Very good point. Versus
one who goes into an organization and they're going to continue, you know, whatever that organization's been doing, tweak it, but they don't have to do it overnight.
That's right.
So again, I think when you talk about attitude, there's a particular type of person who is, quote unquote, a turnaround artist, that can go into an operation and starting day one have to make decisions quickly, has the right attitude about doing it. It's a very difficult situation for not only that person, but for all of those who are going to be affected and impacted by it.
Absolutely. That's the other side of the coin. Let's just say that, take that same person that's asked to go into this university or college that's heading for 60 days of cash left, and they're heading towards bankruptcy and they're not getting the enrollment. And his or her assessment of the place is that it's not efficient, okay? It's too process-oriented, decisions aren't getting made. Quality, the quality and performance of people, of tolerating a lower level of performance than should be. So they're not going to go in there and process the heck. I usually use the analogy, if the plane is going down, do you really want the pilot to come back and say, let's all get in a circle and talk about how we're going to fix things here? You expect the leader in the case to change. So he will deliberately change. I'll say there's a new game in town, there's a whole new value set, this is the way we're going to operate in the future, and that will actually surprisingly drive people out. People self-select often and say, I don't want to be part of this. They go find work in a place that does match up to their value set. They may not be happy with it, but you'll see people will self-select.
Sure, yeah.
In a case like that.
Now, how can a person assess their own attitude?
Well, one of the things, one process I often suggest is to sort of list the negative attitude, the negative things that have happened to you in the past, either in the workplace, in your home, with your friends and stuff like that. List a series of things that you think didn't quite go right. And then for each of those things, try to find out what is the source. You know, what caused the conflict? What do you think? Were you defensive, or did you threaten somebody? Did you hurt their feelings? Did you prevent them from doing something that they really wanted to do? So try to find out the source, and why is that some baggage to you? For some reason, does that hit a chord with you that you react? It's often sometimes an example. Two examples you'll often see. I've seen cases where a woman will sometimes react negatively to a male supervisor, and so when the male supervisor issues an order or a directive or a suggestion, the woman tends to reject it and resent it. Okay, well then the question is, why are you feeling this way? You would ask yourself, what makes me, when this guy walks in the room, I just shows like that? And it could be that you had a domineering father, or something in your past that you are sort of still haven't resolved and fighting against, so that you project that onto other people. So I think number one thing you can do is begin to look at those instances where you find yourself out of step with somebody or an order, and try to say, what is the baggage, and how could you change that? How you can change that perception? You know?
But again, a person, I guess, has to be willing, though, to really take the time and do this self-assessment themselves, because it's kind of like, from the outside world, you know, people may tell them that they have a bad attitude or they need to change their attitude, but really, unless the person is reflective and starts to really dig deep within their own, personality, are they ever going to really resolve that?
That's a good point, Joe. I think in some cases, no, they don't. I'm thinking now of a science teacher I had that was very negative. You know, he'd come down, all kids were bad, and, there's not a good kid, always complaining about behavior. Kids were always complaining about him. And whenever you tried to make a suggestion to Art, about his own behavior and how he treats kids, that could be the source of the problem, he would overreact and just say, this is an example of lack of discipline and respect and stuff like that. And he took a sabbatical, for a year. And got away and took courses, and it was a time of reflection, quite honestly. And I think being away from the environment, having a chance to be back in the classroom, being able to share his thoughts and what was happening to him in the classroom, hearing from friends and other peers and students, he for some reason was able to look at his own behavior. Up till then he wasn't. He was able to look at his own behavior and develop a plan to go back and change his behavior. He came back after a year. He had a whole different attitude set. Because of that attitude set, he interfaced and related to students differently. They reacted to him in a much more positive way, and he was much happier in his work. Now, not everybody can take a year-long sabbatical, but there's an example for somewhere getting away from the environment, a chance to reflect and be open to yourself about who you are and how your own, your own behavior is contributing to the environment, helps you make that change. But sometimes I think when you're in the day to day, in the environment, in the conflict,
It's just more
it's
difficult.
hard. It's hard to really stop and take a look at yourself.
Now, how does a person with a poor attitude view change?
Well, we generally talk about people with it comes up in organizations about people with a bad attitude. Generally comes up, they're not dealing with the change well. Now, let me first say, there is that aspect of that not all change is good. In fact, much of change is bad. There's a statistic that says somewhere between 60 to 75% of all change efforts fail. Okay, so let's say this. So it's not all bad if you think the proposed change is going to hurt the company that you speak out. Maybe we could talk a little bit about how you speak out against the change, because you want to come across not as a negative person, but open to the ideas, but you're going to point out to them you're also concerned about the success of your home or the company or your team, and that you want to be able to discuss that your intent is the same for positive outcomes. You just want to come across, you've got some questions about this change.
Sure.
So let's get that off the table. But the person that usually is threatened by a change effort generally sees that an incident is, in other words, any change is going to be permanent. It's going to be that way forever. They tend to see it as pervasive, that it won't, you'll start in this team, we'll do this in this team, and it's going to affect the whole company, the whole organization, or the whole family, that sort of thing. And that's personal. The reason for this change is, to get at me, and my behavior. So the resistance generally is sort of overestimating its impact on the permanency, the pervasiveness, and they personalize it themselves, versus being able to stand back and say, okay, does this have some merit for the community at large?
At large.
I mean, for example, often in times like this, companies are downsizing or right-sizing, whatever you want to call it, because they just don't have the resource. There's many ways you can do that. I mean, it isn't a positive act in that sense, but there are more positive ways an organization can go about doing that, by keeping people informed, trying to do it in a very thoughtful, respectful, in a supportive way as possible. And I've heard the story of the other day, the way this one small company found out they were being eliminated. They got a telegram or a letter in the mail just saying that as of 48 hours they had no job. Where other companies can come in and say things aren't going well. We better start planning. How can we help you? Can we give you severance? Can we set you up where you can begin to look for other jobs with common skills? That sort of thing. There's many ways you can deal with change.
Now, what impact does a person's attitude have on a team's performance?
I think all of us have been on teams that they've had a very negative person on there, person that doesn't carry their weight, and what happens? It brings the whole team down. When you have a person with a negative attitude on the team, it ruins the whole team because it drives the good players out. Good, competent people don't want to be part of something negative. So I've seen time and time again, a person with a negative attitude will bring the whole team down. The good players leave on that. And it's decay in the whole organization. It starts spreading. I truly believe it sounds shocking, but one person can, in many ways, bring down the culture of one company, and certainly can destroy a team, So it's powerful.
Very much
and I think what happens, we often, as supervisors, don't know how to deal with a person with a negative attitude. You want to respect their opinion, but they're preventing the positive experience and outcomes. And we say, well, they're competent, they have the knowledge and skills, so what can I do? Because attitude is, they'll say, well, show me an example, give me an example. You have to be prepared to give me an example. So since it's a little more amorphous, we tend to avoid it. And think about that, Joe. We avoid the very thing that's critical to the success of the team.
Right, that's right. Because that does, Ted, that brings us right back to the beginning where it's, you've got the knowledge-based person, they've got the skills, but it's that attitude that's the make or break.
That's right.
And not only for themselves, but for perhaps a whole organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I can't believe it, but our time is up, and there's a whole lot more that I wanted to talk about that we just don't have time for this time, but maybe another time we'll be able to pick this up with some other subjects. But I certainly want to thank you, Ted, for being with us today and sharing your insights on the subject of attitude and its impact on individuals' behavior. And I also want to thank you, the viewer, for spending time with us again this month. I'm Joe Halco, and on future shows, I look forward to bringing you other services and programs that NCSS offers local residents. And I'll be back next month with another episode of NCSS Here for You. This has been another episode of NCSS Here for You. We hope that you found today's discussion informative and educational. For over 50 years, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has been providing access to quality psychosocial services to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community have changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. Thanks once again for tuning in this month. NCSS's purpose remains creating a stronger community, one person at a time.